It was a blistering summer afternoon, and the highway buzzed with cars speeding toward their destinations. I was under the hood of an old, rusty pickup truck, sweat dripping down my brow as I worked against the clock to get the engine purring again. Being a mechanic in a rundown garage on the outskirts of town wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it was all I had. The sound of screeching tires tore through the air, followed by the unmistakable crunch of metal against metal. My head snapped up. Across the street, a sleek black car had slammed into the guardrail. It had crumpled like paper. Smoke billowed out from under the hood, and my stomach twisted when I saw the driver's door jammed shut. I didn't think. I just moved. Grabbing my toolbox, I bolted across the street, narrowly dodging a truck that honked angrily as it sped past. My boots skidded on the gravel as I reached the car. Inside was a woman, her hands trembling as she tried to open the door. Her long, chestnut hair clung to her tear-streaked face, and her eyes, wide with panic, locked onto mine. "Help me. I can't get out," she gasped, her voice laced with fear. "Hang tight," I said, yanking on the door handle. It wouldn't budge. "Don't worry. I'll get you out." The acrid smell of burning fuel filled my nostrils, and my heart hammered. I reached for a crowbar from my toolbox and jammed it into the gap between the door and the frame. With a grunt, I pushed with all my strength. The door groaned, then finally popped open. "Come on." I reached in, carefully pulling her free from the wreckage. She stumbled, clutching my arm as her knees buckled. I steadied her, noticing a nasty gash on her forehead. "You're bleeding. Sit down," I said, guiding her to the side of the road. She shook her head, her breath shallow and uneven. "The car, it's going to..." A deafening explosion cut her off. The car erupted into flames, the heat searing my skin even from several feet away. I shielded her with my body, feeling her grip tighten on my arm as she let out a terrified cry. "It's okay," I said, my voice firm but soothing. "You're safe now." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she whispered. Before I could respond, the wail of sirens grew louder, and an ambulance and a police car screeched to a halt nearby. Paramedics rushed to her side, but she kept her gaze on me, as if anchoring herself in the chaos. "Wait," she said as they began to lift her onto a stretcher. She reached out, grabbing my hand. "What's your name?" "Luke," I said, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "Luke Carter." "I'm Sophia," she said softly. "Thank you, Luke, for everything." I watched as they loaded her into the ambulance, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't quite identify. I didn't know who she was or why fate had thrown us together, but something told me this wasn't the last I'd see of Sophia. A week passed, and I tried to push the incident out of my mind. Life in the garage returned to its usual rhythm, but I couldn't shake the image of Sophia's terrified eyes or the way she'd held on to me like I was her lifeline. One evening, as I was locking up, a sleek black SUV pulled into the lot. The driver's door opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. He had an air of authority, his piercing blue eyes scanning the garage with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "Luke Carter," he asked, his voice crisp and commanding. "That's me," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Can I help you?" "I believe you already helped someone very important to me," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Richard Maxwell, Sophia's father." I froze, the name hitting me like a ton of bricks. Richard Maxwell, the billionaire real estate mogul whose face was on every magazine cover and news channel. What was he doing here? I stared at Richard Maxwell's outstretched hand, my mind racing. The man was a living legend, a billionaire whose name carried weight in every corner of the business world. And now he was standing in my grimy little garage. After a moment, I shook his hand, my grip firm despite the confusion swirling in my head. "It's good to meet you, Mr. Maxwell. I'm glad Sophia's okay." "She told me what you did," he said, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. "You saved her life, Luke. That's not something I take lightly." "It was just instinct," I said, shrugging. "Anyone would have done the same." He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You'd be surprised how many people wouldn't." There was a beat of silence before he continued. "I came here to thank you personally, and to offer you an opportunity." "An opportunity?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black envelope, the kind that screamed luxury before you even opened it. He handed it to me, and I hesitated before taking it. Inside was a card with elegant gold lettering. "You're invited to a gala I'm hosting tomorrow night," he said. "Sophia will be there, and she insisted you come." "A gala?" I laughed nervously, holding up my grease-stained hands. "I don't think I'm exactly gala material." Richard's smile widened, but there was an edge to it. "Trust me, Luke. You'll fit in just fine. Besides, I think you'll find it's worth your time." Before I could protest, he gestured to the driver, who handed him a briefcase. Richard set it on the workbench beside me and flipped it open, revealing neat stacks of cash. "Consider this a token of my gratitude," he said. $50,000 for the man who saved my daughter." I blinked, my heart pounding. The money was more than I'd make in years working at the garage. My hands itched to reach for it, but something held me back. "I can't take this," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't help Sophia for a reward." Richard studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he closed the briefcase and pushed it toward me. "Think of it as a gesture of goodwill. Take it, or leave it. Either way, I'll see you tomorrow night." Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and walked back to the SUV. I stood there, stunned, as the car disappeared down the road, leaving me alone with the briefcase and an invitation to a world I'd never dreamed of stepping into. The next evening, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the borrowed suit that clung awkwardly to my frame. My reflection stared back at me, a mixture of nerves and disbelief etched on my face. I wasn't sure why I'd decided to go to the gala, but something about the way Richard had spoken, the intensity in his voice, had piqued my curiosity. When I arrived at the venue, I was struck by the sheer opulence of it all. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the room buzzed with the laughter and chatter of the city's elite. I felt like an intruder in a world I didn't belong to, but I squared my shoulders and reminded myself why I was here. "Luke," a familiar voice called out, and I turned to see Sophia weaving through the crowd. She looked radiant, her dark green gown hugging her figure, and her hair swept into an elegant updo. But what caught my attention most was the genuine smile on her face. "You made it," she said, her voice warm. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come." "I wasn't sure I should," I admitted. "This isn't exactly my scene." Her smile softened. "You're here, and that's what matters." Before I could respond, Richard appeared at her side, his presence commanding as ever. "Luke," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Glad to see you could make it." "Thanks for the invitation," I said, glancing around. "This is something else." "Welcome to my world," he said with a faint smirk. "Now, let's talk about why I really invited you." Richard led me to a quieter corner of the room, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. His demeanor shifted, the casual charm replaced by something colder, more calculating. "I appreciate what you did for Sophia," he began, his tone low. "But I have to ask, what's your angle?" "My angle?" I repeated, taken aback. "I don't have an angle. I just did what anyone else would have done." "That's what you keep saying," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But men like you don't usually cross paths with families like mine, unless they're looking for something." I felt a spark of anger flare up in my chest. "I'm not looking for anything, Mr. Maxwell. I didn't even know who she was when I pulled her out of that car." Richard studied me for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in my eyes. Finally, he nodded, a flicker of respect in his expression. "Fair enough," he said. "But let me give you some advice. This world is full of people who will try to use you. Keep your guard up." I left the gala that night with my head spinning. Richard's warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far bigger than I realized. As I walked to my truck, parked far from the glitzy venue, I heard footsteps behind me. "Luke Cartwright," a voice drawled. I turned to see a man leaning against a black sedan, his expensive suit contrasting with the threatening smirk on his face. Two others stood nearby, their stances rigid, their eyes cold. "Who's asking?" I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Let's just say I'm a concerned party," the man said, pushing off the car. "You've caught the attention of some powerful people. People who don't take kindly to outsiders getting too close to the Maxwells." My jaw tightened. I'm not looking for trouble. I just help someone in need. The man chuckled, the sound dripping with menace. That's the thing about trouble. It doesn't care if you're looking for it. I felt the tension in the air, my instincts screaming at me to stay calm. If this is some kind of warning, you can save your breath. I don't want anything to do with your world. Good, the man said, his smirk widening. Then stay out of it. Without another word, they climbed back into the sedan and drove off, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit parking lot. My hands clenched into fists. Whatever I'd gotten myself into, it was clear that walking away wouldn't be as simple as I hoped. The next morning, I was back at the garage, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter from the night before. As I worked on a battered old sedan, the sound of tires crunching on gravel made me glance up. To my surprise, Sophia stepped out of a silver car, her expression a mix of determination and worry. "Sophia," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," she said, walking toward me. "It's important." I gestured to a bench by the garage, and we sat down. "What's going on?" She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I overheard my father talking to someone last night. He's worried about you. He thinks you might be in danger." I raised an eyebrow. "Danger? From who?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "But my father has enemies. People who would do anything to hurt him or the people he cares about." I let out a humorless laugh. "I'm just a mechanic, Sophia. Why would anyone care about me?" "Because you saved me," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "And that makes you a target?" Her words sent a chill down my spine. I'd never considered the possibility that my act of kindness could put me in harm's way. But the fear in her eyes told me this wasn't just paranoia. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my tone gentle. "Stay close," she said, meeting my gaze. "If anything happens, promise me you'll call." I didn't have to wait long to see what Sophia meant. That night, as I locked up the garage, I noticed a shadowy figure lingering near the entrance. My heart raced as I approached, my senses on high alert. "Can I help you?" I called out. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a man with a scar running down his cheek. He held a crowbar in one hand, his grin predatory. "Nice place you've got here," he said, his voice mocking. "Be ashamed if something happened to it." Before I could respond, he swung the crowbar, shattering the window of a nearby car. Glass rained down, and I felt a surge of anger. "Back off," I said, my voice firm. "You don't want to do this." The man chuckled, twirling the crowbar. "Oh, I think I do." I didn't wait for him to make the first move. Grabbing a wrench from my toolbox, I lunged forward, my instincts taking over. The clash was brutal, but short-lived. When it was over, the man lay groaning on the ground, his weapon discarded. "Tell whoever sent you," I said, my voice cold, "that I'm not afraid of them." The next day, I found a note taped to the garage door. The handwriting was jagged, the words simple but chilling. "This is just the beginning." I stared at the note, my jaw tightening. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to back down. But neither was I. If they thought they could scare me into submission, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Sophia's warning replayed in my mind, and I knew I couldn't face this alone. It was time to find out who was behind the threats, and why they were so determined to drag me into their war. I couldn't let this slide. Whoever these people were, they had already crossed the line, and I wasn't about to sit back and let them destroy my life. But I knew I couldn't face this alone. If I wanted answers, I needed to go straight to the source, the Maxwells. That evening, I called Sophia. She picked up almost instantly, her voice tinged with relief. "Luke, is everything okay?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. "I got a visit from one of your dad's so-called enemies last night. They trashed the garage and left me a nice little note to remind me this isn't over." There was a pause, and I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "I'm so sorry, Luke. I told you this might happen. I'll talk to my dad. He'll know what to do." "No," I said firmly. "I need to talk to him myself. If I'm going to be dragged into this, I deserve to know what's going on." She hesitated before finally agreeing. "Okay, come by the house tomorrow. I'll make sure he's there." The next day, I found myself standing outside the Maxwell's sprawling estate. The mansion was even more intimidating up close, its towering gates and manicured gardens screaming wealth and power. A security guard let me in after Sophia vouched for me, and I was led to a grand study where Richard Maxwell waited. He stood when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Luke, I hear you've had a rough couple of days." "You could say that," I replied, crossing my arms. "Care to explain why people are coming after me?" Richard gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. He sighed and leaned against the edge of his desk. "I was hoping this wouldn't involve you, but it seems my enemies have decided otherwise." "Who are they?" I asked, my tone sharp. "And what do they want?" "They're a group of former business rivals," he said. "People who blame me for their failures. Some of them lost everything when I exposed their corruption. They've been trying to hurt me ever since. And now they're coming after me because I helped your daughter?" I said, my frustration boiling over. Richard nodded grimly. "Saving Sophia put you in their crosshairs. They see you as someone close to us, someone they can use or destroy." I clenched my fists, anger and disbelief churning inside me. "So, what am I supposed to do? Just sit back and wait for them to come after me again?" "No," Richard said, his voice firm. "You're not alone in this. I'll make sure you're protected." "Protected how?" I asked skeptically. "You can't keep me locked up in some mansion." Richard's gaze hardened. "I have resources, Luke. People who can ensure your safety. But you have to trust me." I wasn't sure I trusted him. Not completely. But I didn't have many options. "Fine," I said. "But if this gets worse, I'm handling it my way." For the next few days, I tried to go about my life as usual, but it wasn't easy. Richard's men were discreet but ever-present, their black SUVs parked near the garage, their eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. I hated feeling like a target, but I couldn't deny that their presence brought some peace of mind. Sophia visited often, bringing coffee and a sense of normalcy. She'd sit on the bench outside the garage, watching as I worked, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. Despite the danger looming over us, I found myself looking forward to her visits more than I cared to admit. One afternoon, as we sat in the fading sunlight, Sophia turned to me with a serious expression. "Luke, why didn't you take the money my father offered you?" I shrugged, wiping my hands on a rag. "Because I didn't help you for a reward. It didn't feel right." She smiled softly. "You're one of the good ones, you know that." "Maybe," I said, glancing at her. "Or maybe I'm just stubborn." Her laughter was like a balm to my frayed nerves, but it was short-lived. The sound of tires screeching down the road made us both tense. A black car sped past the garage, its windows tinted, and my gut told me something was wrong. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Sure enough, a knock at the garage door jolted me awake. I grabbed a wrench for protection and cautiously opened the door to find a man I didn't recognize. "Relax," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping the wrench raised. "Call me Ethan," he said, stepping inside. His tone was calm, almost too calm. "I used to work for Richard Maxwell. Now, I work for the people who want him gone." My grip tightened on the wrench. "Then why are you here?" "Because I don't like the way this is going," Ethan said. "The people I work for, they're not just looking to scare you. They're planning something big, something dangerous." "And you're telling me this why?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Because you're innocent," he said simply. "You don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire." Ethan's warning set off a chain reaction of events that escalated the stakes. He revealed that the group targeting Richard wasn't just after revenge. They were planning to dismantle his entire empire, and they were willing to hurt anyone who stood in their way, including Sophia and me. The battle lines were drawn, and I found myself thrust deeper into a world of power, betrayal, and danger. As the tension mounted, I realized that walking away was no longer an option. If I wanted to protect the people I cared about, I'd have to fight back with everything I had. Ethan's warning wasn't an exaggeration. 2 nights later, the garage was hit. It started with a power outage, plunging the entire block into darkness. I was working late when the first Molotov cocktail shattered against the side of the building, flames licking at the walls. Damn it! I grabbed an extinguisher, adrenaline surging as I rushed to douse the flames. But the attack wasn't over. Shadows moved outside, and I heard the crunch of footsteps. They were coming. Gripping a tire iron, I positioned myself by the entrance. The door burst open, and 3 men stormed in, their faces hidden by masks. Without hesitation, I swung, the tire iron connecting with a sickening thud. The man crumpled, but the others advanced, one lunging at me with a knife. The fight was brutal. Every blow felt like survival instinct, every move fueled by the sheer will to stay alive. By the time it was over, the attackers were either unconscious or retreating, and I was left bruised and bloodied but standing. Sophia's car screeched into the lot moments later. She jumped out, her eyes wide with terror. "Luke, what happened?" "Your dad's enemies," I panted, leaning against the workbench. "They're done playing games." The next day, I stormed into Richard Maxwell's office, my patience gone. "Enough of this," I shouted, slamming my hands on his desk. "You said you'd protect me, but these people just try to kill me. What are you doing about it?" Richard's calm demeanor cracked for the first time. "I underestimated them," he admitted, his voice low. "But I won't make that mistake again." "You'd better not," I snapped, "because I'm done being a sitting duck." Richard leaned forward, his eyes burning with resolve. "Then let's go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "I mean, we hit them where it hurts," Richard said. "I know who's behind this. If you're willing to fight, I'll make sure you have the resources to take them down." I hesitated. The thought of stepping deeper into this dangerous game terrified me, but I was done running. "Fine," I said. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way." Over the next week, Richard's resources came into play. Surveillance footage, insider tips, and a small army of private security gave us an edge. Ethan, despite his shady past, proved invaluable, feeding us intel about the group's movements and plans. Our first move was swift and precise. We intercepted a shipment of weapons intended for the group, cutting off their supply. Then we exposed one of their financial backers, forcing him to sever ties. Each blow weakened their operation, but it also made them more desperate and dangerous. It wasn't long before the retaliation came. Sophia was taken. I arrived at the garage to find a note taped to the door. "Come alone, or she dies." My blood ran cold. They had crossed the line, and now it was personal. Richard tried to stop me from going, but I didn't give him a choice. "This is on me," I said. "I'm getting her back." The location was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I arrived at night, armed with little more than a crowbar and the determination to save Sophia. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The group's leader, a man with cold, calculating eyes, stood in the center, Sophia tied to a chair behind him. "Let her go," I said, stepping into the light. He smirked. "Brave of you to come alone, but bravery won't save her. Or you." "Try me," I growled. The fight that followed was chaos. I took down the first few attackers with sheer force, my every move fueled by rage. Sophia screamed as the leader grabbed her, a knife pressed to her throat. I lunged, knocking the blade away and slamming him to the ground. By the time it was over, the leader was unconscious, and Sophia was in my arms, shaking but safe. The authorities arrived soon after, tipped off by Richard's team. The group was arrested, their operation dismantled. Richard met us at the scene, relief and gratitude written all over his face. "You saved her again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just keep her safe," I said, my gaze steady. "That's all I need." In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The garage was repaired, the threats were gone, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. Sophia visited often, and our bond grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the garage roof, she turned to me with a smile. "You know, Luke, you're not just a mechanic. You're a hero." I chuckled. "I'm just a guy who cares about the people around him." Her hand found mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd found something worth holding on to.